today's forum, I think you of course are aware that Mike Burdock is here to discuss, well, he's here with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, and thank you very much for taking time to come to our forum today to present. And Mike's going to discuss the status and trends of wetlands in Minnesota regarding the MPCA's Minnesota Wetland Condition Assessment through the years 2011 through 2016, and provide kind of summary and overview of that effort that was underway through the PCA. So everyone please welcome Mike, and thanks for coming.
Thanks everybody. I don't know if I need the microphone up, but yeah, no, this is great. So title slide, Minnesota Wetland Condition Assessment. That's just our fancy word for saying our random or probabilistic wetland quality survey. So basically where we go out, we have a random sample of wetland sites, we measure their quality, and because it's an unbiased sample, we can make wetland quality estimates for the state, track how much good, bad, otherwise quality wetlands there are, track it over time with margin of error. So that's basically all we're talking about today. You guys are real lucky, so you know, you may have seen me speak about this before. This is our second iteration of the survey I'll be presenting today, where we gathered data in 2016. Previously we gathered data in 2011 and 2012, and that was presented at one of the WPA winter, what do we call it, symposium, winter meeting. And so, so I'm really happy to be presenting this to you today. We're finishing up the reporting on this right now, so this is like, you guys are seeing the concert before the album comes out. You guys are so cool, you're so cool. You're on it? I mean, yeah. Okay, so why a wetland quality survey? Why are we doing this? Well, first of all, wetlands cover more of Minnesota than lakes and streams combined. It's like our biggest surface water resource in the state, basically. We have this thing called no net loss, right? It's a statewide policy. So it's not any one entity or any single regulatory program, but it's a group of regulatory programs at various levels, at conservation programs, incentive programs, things like that. And it calls for, we're trying to protect the quantity and quality and biological diversity of Minnesota's wetlands. So it's not just quantity piece. So we're trying to get some focus on quality as well. Wetlands are waters of the state, just like lakes and rivers. So the MPCA, that's kind of where the MPCA bit comes in. In theory, we should be monitoring and assessing wetlands just like we do with our streams and lakes. So this is kind of an opportunity to get a piece of that action. And finally, you know, since our wetland resource is just so big and so vast, we don't have that much resource to put to monitoring towards it. These kind of probabilistic monitoring types of surveys are really the most cost-effective way to kind of measure whether or not we're meeting no net loss. Because you can try to tally up like wetland programmatic outcomes, right? But you know, no single program covers all wetland conditions. So if you try to tally up all your programmatic outcomes, it wouldn't come up to a single whole. That's why you need kind of a dedicated effort at doing these kind of surveys. So why are we focusing on vegetation quality? I just want to take a picture, look at this picture. It's late July, the sun is rising, the fog is lifting, and this is what you see out there. Is this wetland in good shape or bad shape, do you think?
Good shape.
Why do you think it's in good shape?
Diverse flora.
Diversity, right? I mean, what kind of plants do we got here? Anybody, we got any guesses? Got Joe Highway, we've got some bone set. Probably hard to see, there's some little twinkles of orange in there, some jewelweed underneath. There's sedge over here, this is some lake sedge, you know. It's kind of, it's expected stuff, right? It's expected kind of native community that we want to see in like a fresh meadow, right? So, you know, we view biology, in this case the wetland plants, as, you know, being reflective of what kind of impacts have been kind of going on at this site for a long time. The biology integrates kind of those impacts over time, and we can put those into quantitative measures and express quality that way. So we use biology as kind of an overall broad state wetland quality indicator. And we use vegetation because why? Does it run away when we go to try to look at it? Or? No, it's there for us to observe. And there's been a lot of research done on developing wetland vegetation quality indicators. So that's why we focus on vegetation. There's other things like Christine was just talking about with her work. There's other ways to measure quality of an ecosystem, right? We focus on vegetation because it's a kind of a well-developed field. So what do we already know about wetland vegetation quality in Minnesota? So this is the results from 2011 and 2012. So the statewide view is actually quite good. Almost half of our wetlands are what we would consider an exceptional vegetation quality, with an additional 16% of good, and good is pretty close to exceptional. So what does that add up to, folks? We got any math whizzes here?
63.
Over 60% are in exceptional to good condition in Minnesota, what we measured in 2011, 2012, with only, you know, about a quarter in kind of a fair condition and only about 11% in kind of poor. But the statewide view doesn't tell the whole story, does it? So if you look at regional quality, if I can use my mouse didn't want to work. If we look at regional quality, so this is up north. We see that over 60% are in that exceptional, with, you know, about another 20 in good. We didn't even see any poor up there. But the exact opposite in the more developed parts of the state, right? Here we have the majority of wetlands are in some sort of degraded state, in a fair or poor condition, with maybe the nod to fair here in the central part of the state, and out in the former prairie, most are poor. That's kind of the overall view we got from 2011, 2012. What else do we find out? Right, that regional condition is going to vary because of stressors out there, because of impacts, right? What's going on in the central hardwood forest area, the former prairie area of the state that isn't going on up north? Agriculture, widespread development for agriculture. So up north, sure, there's some localized impacts, you know, maybe adjacent to roads or water projects or mining, or there's some rotational logging, things of that nature. But by and large, as it concerns wetlands, there's not a whole lot going on. Whereas in the other parts of the state, we have widespread drainage, we have a lot of altered waterways, water courses that have changed how water flows in and out. We have all kinds of stuff going on. So that's the reason why it varies, right? In terms of quality. And non-native invasive species are going to be our most important, our most widespread type of stressor. That's what we found compared to the others. Our shallow marshes and fresh meadows are our most effective wetland plant community types. And it's really because the two most important non-native invasive species are, the most widespread ones are, the invasive cattails and reed canary grass. That's what we've found with our estimates. And kind of the takeaway is that, you know, at least in terms of north, oh, and I should back up for just a second. The reason why the statewide picture is so good, right, is because 75% of Minnesota's wetlands are up in northern Minnesota. So that weights the whole statewide scale towards the good. And kind of the final landing point is, okay, on a statewide view, especially up north, we still have a lot of really good wetlands. Protection would be a good thing, or trying to figure out more ways to do wetland protection. Because, once the non-native invasives get in there, these things don't correct themselves. They don't go away by themselves. Now, if you want them to go away, you're going to have to do some management. And that can typically be very expensive, right? Does this all make sense for you guys? So this is like what we found out in 2011, 2012. So now we're just going to see, like, all right, things stayed the same, have they changed over this 5-year period? Let's find out. So how are we doing our survey? So again, vegetation condition or vegetation quality is our primary indicator. That's basically the only thing that we're focused on right now. It's not that we can't add anything else in the future, because we might do that if we start thinking good indicators kind of emerge, but this is kind of what we're focused on. We do that using the Floristic Quality Assessment. You guys all heard my Floristic Quality stuff, assessment stuff. I see nodding. You guys are experts. You know all that works. Our survey, our Minnesota survey, is an intensification of EPA's National Wetland Condition Assessment. So this is part of a national effort. EPA is doing national quality surveys of all the different water types. Wetlands are one, and we've gotten our due as well. So we work with EPA. They help us with the design stuff. They help us with funding and things like that. And some of our data goes into the national data set to do basically what I'm describing today. They do on a national scale, similar to like the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Status and Trends Survey that measures quantity. They measure quality on a national scale. We follow a 5-year sampling cycle. I mentioned that before. Target population. So, if we're talking a survey, we're talking science, we gotta make some definitions, right? So usually I say offhandedly, this survey covers all of Minnesota's wetlands. Well, it's virtually all, but it's not all. We're covering the non-cultivated wetlands that have less than 1 meter of surface water. So farmed wetlands we're excluding, and wetlands that are too deep to sample without a boat we're excluding. But by and large, that covers something like 90% of Minnesota's wetlands, so we're doing pretty good. Sample frame. So whenever you're doing a survey like this, we need a good wetland map to draw our random samples on. And we use the Minnesota DNR Status and Trends Quantity Survey. Is anybody familiar with that work? Steve Kloiber's work at DNR? Got one, couple, some people nod their heads. So the way that works is, and they work in partnership with us. They look at the quantity side of Status and Trends for Minnesota, and we're supposed to be working the quality side. And so the way it works is that there's approximately 5,000 1-square-mile plots randomly located in Minnesota. Every 3 years they get flown and aerial imagery is taken, and we do wetland mapping, or DNR gets wetland mapping done, and they look for changes. And then they report out how wetland quantity is changing over time. So the picture here is one of their 1-square-mile plots, okay? So maybe it's hard to see, but because I made it all green, but kind of the bright green shading, that's the map of wetland, okay? This trees and stuff, this is upland. So what we do is we send all the data from those 5,000 plots to EPA, and they run their statistical design program on that and plop down our random points. And there's supposed to be a little thing that popped up and said random point right here. So this is one of our random points. And we try to target 150 of these total statewide but we allocate them 50 per major ecoregion. So we have 3 major ecoregions in the state that we recognize anyway. And we also do a 50% revisit rate. That means 75 of these are ones that we went to in 2011, 2012, and 75 are brand new. Oh, there it is. I'm so good at this. So at an individual point, then we plop a half-hectare circle down. That's our standard site. And then within that site, we map out vegetation communities. And we'll just do a walking survey through the whole thing, record every species that we see, do cover estimates by species, by community type. That's our kind of standard protocol. 26 of our sites in 2016 were considered these national sites, and the EPA wants a different, more intense protocol, and so we opted to not do that work and had EPA crews come in and do that. And then it consists of like 5 regular placed 10 by 10 meter plots within the thing, and they do a survey within each plot. Well, we took that data and aggregated it and put it into our data set as well. We did some comparisons in 2011, 2012. We found our walkarounds and what you get from plots is about the same usually, so we felt pretty good to combine those data sets. And then, you know, from the data, what we can do is we calculate our FQA primary metric, which is a weighted coefficient of conservatism based on the abundance of the different plant species are there. And that has been calibrated to a scale of these different, we call it the biological condition gradient, these different levels of conditions. So exceptional, fair, good, poor. And then from that, then we can make the extrapolation at the statewide scale, at those ecoregion scales. We can look at the different type breakdown, and we have some stressor estimates as well. You guys with me? Yeah. So just want to talk a little bit again, touch on more about what our various condition categories mean. So let's imagine you're out in a fresh meadow, and this fresh meadow is like, it's like the Garden of Eden, right? It has not been touched by man. And you have, like, say, a lot of tussock sedge in there. That's your dominant species, maybe a bunch of blue joint, some Salix petiolaris, and you have a whole bunch of fairly common, but your expected native species there. And this is what we would call our exceptional condition. It's the composition and structure of the community as they would exist in the absence of measurable effects of stressors. Okay? Now let's say there was a little introduction of some reed-carrying grass and some narrowleaf cattail there. It's just hanging out, it's present, but it's not doing a whole lot. Most of the structure is the same. All of our composition is basically the same except for these added guys. And this is what we would consider our good, our conceptualized good level. So very similar to that natural community. Here we have some minor changes going on there. Well, let's say our reed-carrying grass is starting to take off now, and starting to take over. Now we got reduced abundance of our former dominant species, our tussock sedge. Maybe reduced dominance in some of our other native co-dominants. Maybe we've lost some more sensitive species. So that's kind of our fair condition, right? Somewhere in the middle. We have moderate changes to structure and composition. Finally, let's say that reed-carrying grass totally took over. We only have a few of our native forbs kind of hanging on. And our once dominant tussock sedge has now been reduced to a clump, you know, the size of this podium. This would be like our poor condition. Large to extreme changes in structure, might have wholesale changes in composition. So we're going to be flashing a lot of estimates according to these categories, and that's kind of what we mean when we say these things. When we put together this scale over a decade ago, there was also a theoretical condition. We ended up calling it absent, basically meaning it's wetland, but it's devoid of living hydrophytic vegetation. And in the first round of the survey, we didn't actually detect any of that, but in 2016, we sure did. So I wanted to just say that we have this additional category out there. So what we have here is a picture of a giant cattail marsh. It's in a WMA up in northwestern Minnesota. And they're actually trying to treat the cattails. They went through and just herbicided the whole thing. I think it was actually 2 years prior to us sampling, and this is what we found. So in theory, it should come back to something eventually, but right now there's literally no vegetation growing. So that's obviously a type of impact we want to try to capture in the survey. Okay, so now that we're armed with what we're talking about, let's look at our 2016 results. So here we go, statewide condition 2016. Once again, the biggest slice of the pie is in that exceptional category. We have more good, so again, right about 60% if you add these two up. Similar slices of the pie compared to last time at the statewide level. And just to try to make things a little more tangible again for these different scales, I have some pictures up here if you can see. So this is an intact, really high quality coniferous swamp. I think we found like 80 species up there. There was like 6 species of orchids in that thing. I mean, real good stuff there. And then, 20 miles away, we would sample a site that's been logged. So we would call this coniferous swamp. The trees have been removed. We have some other obviously changes in the understory, and kicked it down into a fair category after we did all of our scoring. And hopefully, this is probably just a temporal kind of impact, right? Hopefully, oftentimes you come on these things and you'll see little tamarack seedlings coming up, so eventually we'll have a tree canopy here again, and kind of our species kind of recovering. But on the bottom here, we have a coniferous swamp that's being invaded by narrow-leaved cattail. At this point, we still have enough hanging on that it still scores as a fair. But this is probably more of a permanent condition heading towards poor than maybe eventually getting better someday. So how's our regional wetland vegetation quality? So on the left here, we have a handy-dandy map of all of our sampling sites, color-coded by our different condition categories. So what do you guys see here? What do you guys see up north? Lots of blue dots. Lots of blue dots and greens and yellows. What do you see in these ecoregions? Reds and yellows. All right? So when you do the math on these dots, this is what it looks like. So up north, again, predominantly in that exceptional condition. We did detect a little bit of, like we had one site that scored as a 4 up north. So it exists up there, but again, it's at a very low rate. And so and these error bars are 95% confidence intervals. In the central hardwood ecoregion, we have about 50% in that fair. About a quarter in poor, and then kind of low percentages of good and exceptional there as well. Former prairies, this time similar, about half in that fair category, but a good chunk in poor, and this is where our absent category came up. I just love that, I colored it brown. So good. So that's kind of our regional look here. So let's stack that up in terms of changes over time. So at the statewide view, in terms of exceptional good, no change. Statistically insignificant, indistinguishable. Looks like maybe there's a little bump in fair at the statewide scale, but it wasn't significant. There was a decrease in poor and absent when you combine it. So I combined the two categories at both ends, kind of make the change comparison a little bit easier to manage. And we're thinking the reason why this one is significant here is that it's just on the lower end, so our error bars aren't as big at the low end of the scale, so it doesn't take a lot to trigger a significant change. Let's dig into it more. Let's look at the regional view change-wise. So again, and maybe I didn't explain this very well, but the left bar for each pair, that's the 2011, 2012, and the right bar is the 2016. So, up north, we basically had no changes up north. But in these two ecoregions, this is kind of where we're seeing some things happen. In both cases, we have kind of an increase in fair, one being significant, one not quite significant, and then corresponding decreases in this poor absent category. That's kind of what's really popping out at me. So this is kind of an unexpected result, right? Because what did I say earlier? When you get invasive species are our biggest problem in this ecoregion. When invasive species come into a wetland, are they self-correcting? No. So this is kind of an unexpected result to see. What you could nominally say is, hey, we have some wetland improvement here in these ecoregions. So this is a bit of a head scratcher. So we're gonna go through some more results and then we'll come back to this at the end. What can we say about wetland quality by type? So here we have the same graphs, same types of graphs, and our little dot maps, broken down by the three major coordinate classes. So forested, scrub, shrub, and emergent. So we're able to break down results by that and do extrapolation by type. Unfortunately, we can only do type extrapolations at the statewide scale. We can't do statewide and ecoregion just because our data becomes too parsed down at that point. But we can still say something about type. So our forested wetlands, really good shape, over approximately half are net exceptional. And we have hardly any in that poor, handful, and about 30% in fair. You guys got any guesses why that might be, these forested wetlands?
They're not very sensitive to invasion by green canary grass and cattails.
That might be part of it. Part of it too is look at the dot map. See where most of the samples were for forested wetlands? So most of these are coniferous swamps, maybe some bogs and hardwood swamps. Most of these are located in northern Minnesota where there are a few stressors, right? That's kind of what I'm thinking is why we don't have as many impacts here. A lot of these yellows that are coming up are like logged sites that kind of get popped into that fair because they've been logged. Scrub shrub, again, about half net exceptional. Maybe we have a little bit more of a bump in terms of poor, but otherwise very similar to forested. Again, I think most of our scrub shrub wetlands are again up north, though obviously we do have more shrub cars and things stretching down into central Minnesota. And that dew in the understory can have that reed canary grass understory in there as well, in some cases. And then finally, our emergent wetlands. So our emergent wetlands, these are the ones that have a highest rate, significantly higher rate of poor condition compared to the other types. Okay, that's kind of the takeaway. So significantly higher red bar than these two, significantly lower blue bar than these two, statewide. So again, most of our problems with degraded wetlands are going to be in that emergent type. You know, qualitatively, this is very similar to the result that we got before. We are noticing though that this red bar is significantly lower by 10–15% in 2016 than it was in 2011, 2012. So again, that kind of gets back a little bit to those, in these prairie and hardwood forest ecoregions where we had what looks like wetlands getting better. Well, emergent wetlands are kind of the predominant type in those ecoregions. So I think that's kind of being reflected, that change is being reflected in that emergent type as well. We can make estimates by plant community types. So getting even to a finer scale than the coord classes. So we follow a modified Eggers and Reed plant community classification. And to my knowledge, this is the only type of estimates that we have at this level of classification. So our most predominant plant community type are coniferous swamps, over 2 million acres, right here. And so in these pairs are, the blue is 2011, 2012, and the red is 2016 for each plant community type here. And in theory, they're kind of arranged, well, they're arranged in order by how extensive they were in 2011, 2012. We have 3 more communities with over 1 million acres apiece. And I should say too, that the official DNR statewide wetland acreage estimate is about 10.6 million acres. Okay? Our survey captured represents about 10 million acres. So that's why, you know, this figure over 2 million, you know, represents a little more of 20% of Minnesota's wetlands. Does that kind of make sense? So then we have 3 more communities at over 1 million acres that represent approximately 10% of Minnesota's wetlands. They are shallow marsh, fresh meadow, and open bog. And we have a number more that range between 250,000 and 1 million acres. I'm not going to go through and list them. And then we have a handful where there's really not much extent in the state. Our deep marshes, that's things like bulrush beds and wild rice beds. Shallow open water. Now again, we underrepresent how much shallow open water there is in the survey. So we're saying as about 100, we only represent about 100,000 acres. DNR estimates there's about 500,000 acres in the wetland of shallow open water runs. Reason again that we miss so many is because we need a boat to be able to sample the deeper ones. Floodplain forest is out here. We did have one site in wet prairie in 2016. And then of course we know there's calcareous fen in the state, right? We didn't pick up any in the survey. So it just means that with our sampling frequency, our sampling intensity, we just by chance did not pick up calcareous. In terms of changes from time 1 to time 2, we really only saw 2 changes. We saw a decrease in hardwood swamp and a small increase in coniferous bog. I'm of the opinion that these are just due purely by random chance. So whenever, I think in 2011, 2012, we ended up sampling something like 20 hardwood swamps, and it turned out to be representing that many acres. And in 2016, I think we only sampled 14 of them. Again, purely by random chance. So sometimes you're just going to get differences purely by random chance. I don't think that there's a huge loss of hardwood swamps out there. It's just, our tool for measuring it is not gonna be that precise. Similarly with coniferous bogs. Coniferous bogs don't form overnight, right? Let's take a look at shallow marshes and fresh meadows at the condition of these two community types. So we're only going to focus on these two because why? Our emergent wetlands are the ones that are having the most problems, right? And both of these types both had enough samples that we can make some fairly statistically decent estimates from. And so what do we see? These are the two communities that have the highest rates of poor condition. And in our shallow marshes in particular, that's where we've picked up that absent condition. We actually had 2 sites that were like this, that have been treated for cattail removal but hadn't recovered to anything yet. That showed up in this type. So once again, right, if you compare these to the other community types, just as in 2011 and 2012 and 2016, these two were the types that had the highest rates of poor condition wetland. One thing to note, again, is that between the 2 time periods, for both these communities, there's a significant decrease in the poor absent category between the 2. So remember, when we were seeing that in the emergent estimates, it changed over time where it seemed to get better, and then that translated into the regional estimates where it seems to get better. Kind of where it's happening is happening really in these 2 communities. I just want to take a little detour. So our all wetland survey isn't the only survey that we do. We actually have one that's focused just on depressional wetlands. And this one actually predated our all wetland survey and was really kind of a pilot project for the national survey and what we've done since. But we've continued this separate depressional survey on as well. So think of prairie potholes as kind of what we're trying to focus on with the depressional survey. They are a iconic but small part of Minnesota's wetland resource. In terms of extent, we figure they represent only about 7% of Minnesota's wetlands. But in the central hardwood forest and former prairie ecoregion, that's where we focus our work. They're about 22% of the wetlands in those ecoregions, so a little bit more important than these parts of the state. We've had 3 iterations of the survey, 2007 through 2009, and then 2012 and 2017. We have water chem, invertebrates, and vegetation indicators. Previously, we were doing a vegetation IBI, which we did that in the first 2 iterations, but now we finally replaced that with the FQA approach in 2017. So this is our first time with the depressionals doing this FQA approach. So it's the same approach that we're doing with our all wetland survey. And so here are the quality estimates for those depressional wetlands in these 2 ecoregions, okay? And it's really very similar to what we see with all wetlands. In fact, there are no statistical differences between our all wetland estimates for this extent, this region of the state. In terms of changes over time, we actually saw some decreases in invertebrate and water quality in our 27 iteration, but that's like a whole other story. Either I can come back or my colleague John Jeanette, who runs this part, can come back and tell you about that piece. I just wanted to put that out there that we have this other survey. We're trying to, in the future, we're going to try to see how we can meld the 2 and kind of bring them together. But for now, early indications are, in terms of vegetation, these depressional wetlands are behaving the same is all wetland types in these intervals. Let's talk a little bit about human impacts. So we try to look at human impacts by this thing we call the Human Disturbance Assessment, or HDA. And this is just a categorical, best professional judged categorical rating of human impacts occurring at a site. It's broken down into 6 different factors: landscape alteration, immediate upland alteration, physical alteration. This is like logging or driving through a wetland. Hydrologic alteration, that's changing the source and flow, timing of water. Chemical pollution, and invasive species. So we have narrative guidance for all of these factors, try to make it consistent, and then we will rate each site based on these factors, and based on a combination of them, we can say, we think there's a lot of stressors here, we don't think there's a lot of stressors here. We really try to keep it at kind of a general level. And our severe rating can be triggered by cumulative impacts. Like if all of these are kind of at a moderate level, we might say, okay, we think this is kind of a severely impacted site. Or it might be based on a single overwhelming impact, like a hydro impact. So we have an example here. So this is a site right off Highway 53, north of Virginia. And this was a hardwood swamp that was sloping towards us, and Highway 53 is built right here, backed up water, raised the water level on this wetland, flooded out all the trees, and now we have a mixture of broadleaf and narrowleaf cattail. So most of these factors are, low, moderate, except for the hydrological alteration, right? The hydro kind of changed the whole site. So we would say that's severe hydro, so the whole thing would be severe. So we've done these on all of our sites, and now we can make similar estimates on our stressors to get an idea of maybe trying to get an idea of what's going on. So a really complex graph. Here we have our 3 ecoregions, right guys? Here we have 5 of those factors. They're rated in 4 different categories: minimal, low, moderate, severe. Anything jumping out at you from these? I'm not saying like look at everything here. Not taking a detail. Let's look at broad strokes. But up north, you see a lot of blue and green, very little yellow or red. Okay, so very few impacts or stressors going on. There's more yellow and reds in the more developed parts of the state. Make sense? Mm-hmm. What factor has the most red in the invasive species? Exactly. So this is how we kind of quantify these things and come to this kind of conclusion that invasive species are our biggest factors. Yeah?
The chemical pollution factor, is that more like nutrient changes, or is it more like industrial chemicals, or what does that get into account?
Well, it's supposed to be a catch-all if that stuff is going on. Unfortunately, we only collect water samples if we're at like an open water wetland. And so all of our like depressional sites that I mentioned before, we do water chemistry at, so that's kind of important at those sites. But for this survey, we end up dropping that chemical pollution. But it's supposed to cover things like chlorides or nutrients or potentially other things that are coming out. It's supposed to be kind of a catch-all, like, parameters are in kind of normal background conditions versus elevated and we have a source kind of a thing.
And I guess one other question, who developed that human disturbance assessment?
I did, within our FQA development group, and so it was based off of some earlier work at MWCA that did kind of a similar thing, but they tried to make it numerical, and I just made some tweaks to it and made it more categorical. But you can find the documentation for it on an appendix in our 2011-2012 report. Yeah. Anyway, so what are we seeing? Right. Regional condition is varying with regional stressors. At the statewide scale, which I'm not showing here, you're just going to have to trust me, we didn't see any differences in terms of stressors. When we did that full HDA thing, there were no changes. When you do the breakdown by regions and by these factors, we do see kind of some smattering of changes, but the one that pops out is in 2011 and 2012, these rates of the red circle were about 10% greater than they were here. So in terms of this HDA thing, so now we're seeing a pattern, right? In those emergent wetlands and shallow marshes and fresh meadows, they're seemingly getting better. And also, at least in our stressors, those invasive species seem to be at a lower rate of at a poor level, or a severe level. I'm sorry, I'm mixing this up. Does that make sense? So these things are kind of tracking each other. And then just a quick word about non-native invasives. So we say that, again, the invasive species factor at the strongest, well, it's not only the most widespread, but it also has the greatest, what's called the relative risk. So relative risk comes out of, is a measurement that comes out of like the medical field, where they look at different risk factors for, like, say, diseases, and things that have a higher relative risk that would be something to target for. Like for cancer, smoking gives you a high relative risk for cancer versus listening to NPR. So, and the mathematical formula for relative risk is, in this case, so if a given stressor is at a severe level, which we rated it at a severe level, what's the probability that you also have a poor condition? And you divide that by if that particular stressor is at a low level and you still have a poor condition. And basically, all of these have a statistically significant risk greater than 1. So they all have elevated relative risk. But basically what's going on is when these things are severe, the condition is always poor. The reason why invasive species has a higher relative risk is that there's very few sites that are poor with low invasive species. So it's just saying that there's few sites with low invasive species. That's why this one ends up being so high. So we say that's the invasive species factor as the strongest, is like the strongest stressor. Again, all these different stressor types are associated with high abundance of non-native invasives. We're also seeing some sites.
Could you elaborate on that a little bit? So it's interesting to, you know, I mean, it seems like if you have an altered landscape and they're like they get invasive species, you know, I mean, so
Yeah.
the causal relationships are being kind of tricky here because if you're giving invasive species a lot of credit for being the most important stressor, but
Right.
uncoupling it from its obvious covariance, that's
Exactly. So kind of that's the trick here, and there's no grand solution. But invasive species are really response to stress, as well as a stressor in and of themselves. So it's hard to really decouple that here. So I was just about to say we do have estimates. We are seeing sites that we have high relative non-native cover, lots of invasive species, but low stressors. So that would indicate, like, okay, we have some invasives that come in maybe due to a natural disturbance. Nothing else seems to be really happening at the sites, but they're taking over anyway. So that's happening, as well as we have the site where, okay, we've messed around with the hydrology, and that's going to invasive species. So it's kind of they play kind of a unique role in this whole stressor response relationship. And it's, I think, ultimately difficult to detangle. Ultimately, I think what we're trying to say is that all of these things promote invasive species, but it's really the invasive species themselves that's the real driver of change at fair and poor wetlands overall, for the most part. Does that help? Okay. And again, our reed canary grass and basic cattail are our most important invasives. Same as last time. I should probably pick up the pace here. Important note here. So our extent of high relative non-native cover, so this is sites that have more than 35% non-native of their total cover, decreased by what, 17%? When you look at that mixed wood plains and temperate prairies ecoregion combined. So remember, we're seeing those changes where it said, oh, it's getting better maybe. It's kind of what we're linking into. In terms of what we've measured, our measurements are saying are kind of our invasives that when they're really high abundant, it's actually gone down a bit in a statistically significant way. Just an aside here, before we kind of wrap things up, we were also able to generate some estimates on what we call prior plowed wetlands. So these are wetlands that have once been plowed at one point for row crop agriculture, and we determined that based on old aerial photos or just landowner accounts. Landowner might say, oh yeah, we used to farm here in the 1980s, and now we don't anymore, and it's one of our sample sites. And so we can tag our sites as being prior plowed, and then run them through our statistics and come up with estimates. So here we have an example of a restoration, and this was actually the site where they said they farmed it in the 80s, and now it's just been left to just come back on its own. So we estimate there's about 470,000 acres of prior plowed wetland in Minnesota. So it's a noticeable chunk, right? Most of that, of course, is going to be in that mixed wood plains and temperate prairies ecoregion, where we have wide-scale agriculture. And that actually is about 16% of our wetlands. If you kind of think about it from broad strokes, it kind of makes sense, right? Areas were settled, farmers were trying to farm as much as they could, and then things kind of got brought back once conservation programs kind of came in place, incentive programs to not farm these things. And so you can see why that we have a noticeable chunk of these kind of prior plowed wetlands. And this was the same since our first iteration. Nothing's changed. So let's get to the point where we try to explain this change that's going on. So why has there been a decrease in poor wetland extents and corresponding increase in fair in those two ecoregions where we have mostly degraded wetlands? So this graph here is, again, we have the pairs where left side is 2011 and 2012, the right side for each pair is 2016 estimates. Just for those two ecoregions, when you kind of lump them all together, we get a significant increase in fair and a corresponding significant decrease in foreign. So, according to the math and according to what we set up here, you would say the vegetation has improved, wetland condition has improved. But this kind of goes against our reasoning, right? Like, we don't think that invasive species problems aren't fixing themselves. So how would they change? Could it be some widespread natural disturbance like changes in precipitation? If just glancing at precip maps in the years leading up to 2011 and then the years in between into 2016, you get some drought years in Minnesota, you get some wet years. It looks all pretty random. It looks like it all evens out. There hasn't been a string of 5 or 6 drought years in a row or a string of 5 or 6 wet years in a row that would cause kind of widespread natural change. What about decreased human impacts? Well, at least on the overall each HDA rating scale, there was no change between 2011 and 2016. In terms of impacts, we didn't see any big changes in that. Yeah. And has there been any widespread or broad management applications to improve vegetation in Minnesota? No, there has not. So what about random chance? Do we have some random chance at play? You know, in 2011, 2012, we just happened to have some sites that had more levels of non-native invasives, and in 2016, we just happened to have some sites with less. That could be a possibility. That seems to be like a more plausible answer. But also digging into it, it seems like we might also have some systematic sampling errors. So if you look at this table here, we got it broken down by our northern ecoregion and then these two combined. These are the total communities that we sampled. And we're just trying to count the number of large non-native cover increases. And these are just at the sites where we sampled in 2011 and 2016. So these are pairs. So we're looking for changes within that pair, number of changes. And so if what you'd want to see is a random error about the same number of increases and the same number of decreases, that would tell you that, okay, we just have some random sampling error happening. What we see instead is that at those sites that we've revisited, we have about twice as many cases of where it's decreased by a large amount from 2011 to 2016. And conversely, nothing else is going on at these sites. So I think what we're seeing here is relative to each other, we have a big enough sample error, and there was some bias in there. Either the first time, the first people were putting higher cover values of non-natives in there, and the people in 2016 were saying it's lower. So me personally, I think the changes that we're seeing are some sort of combination of random chance and some systematic sampling, which is unfortunate because, boy, did we put a lot of work into it. But that's how it goes. That's kind of the learning curve. Okay, wrapping things up. If you look just kind of qualitatively, right, at all of what I've described, our overall picture of wetland quality has remained the same, which is kind of what we expected, right? Our statewide vegetation quality is good, and this is driven by our wetlands in the north. Those are mostly good. The majority of wetlands outside of the north are in some sort of degraded state. But maybe now they're more are in fair condition than we thought before. That's what the numbers tell us, but again, there might be some sampling here or there. It's really difficult to see the differences at this point. And again, too, take in mind, this is the second time we've done this. This is meant to be long-term monitoring, and really you only start to begin building trends after many iterations of this to see ultimately, are we, is wetland veg quality staying the same as we hope it is for no net loss, or is it decreasing, or is it increasing? Really, we're only going to know after doing this a few more times. And hopefully we can improve our process a little bit too, so we have more certainty in our numbers. A quick shout out about the Rapid Floristic Quality Assessment. I gave that presentation last year. So again, we've created the tool that we use at a level that hopefully you guys can find useful. It's geared towards someone with a moderate botanical expertise. It has those same assessment outcomes that I've been talking about all day here, the same categories. It's just simplified a little bit to kind of get to that point. It's compatible with the MinRam and Army Corps vegetation sampling, as long as some certain specifications are met. And we have all this material on our website. We have this manual and data sheets and calculator, all of these things. If you haven't, I encourage you to go check it out. It's really cool stuff. And there we go. Pretty picture. Done. Questions? contracted with an outfit called Midwest Biodiversity Institute out of Ohio. And so the Ohio crew came here for a couple of weeks. And we tried to coordinate with them, so we helped them set up the sites and get landowner info and stuff. And so we had some communication afterwards, because we wanted to get their data right away so we could enter it into our own database. And they were blown away by the scope and remoteness of northern Minnesota. Very much so. They had this one in Lake of the Woods where we actually helicoptered to the site 2011 and 2012, and it was a repeat for them. And they went in on foot off of this logging road, and they were unable to finish in a single day, so then they had to walk out in the dark. They have all these horrible notes in their field sheets, and then they had to come back and do it again to finish the sample. So it was an excruciating thing. One comment on that too is we did notice some less than ideal botanical work out of the contract crews, which you can kind of expect. If they're from Ohio, and if they're looking at something in northern Minnesota, they're listing species that don't even exist in Minnesota. That can be kind of a red flag. So part of the uncertainty in here too is maybe we need to think harder about doing that again, and maybe we'll want to do those samples ourselves the next time. Something we need to consider. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, Mike, regarding the data set that's referenced for the QA, that's the Husbeth and Milburn publication, right?
Those are the C values,
Yeah,
yeah.
the C values,
Yep.
right?
Coefficient
And
conservative.
of course, if I recall, the species within that publication are those that occur in the wetland habitat, right?
Yep.
And I was curious if you know of any other efforts or initiatives that would broaden that to include like the entire list of species within Minnesota, or at least more of the common ones to start, like the swinging mill home down in the Chicago region, where they include plant species in upland and wetlands.
So Scott Milburn has tried to carry that torch, but it's been a difficult one. He's tried to get some folks at DNR and him do a similar process with the upland species as well, and do some regionalization. But I think that just kind of fizzled out.
I saw Scott at a conference a couple weeks ago that he said, because I presented some stuff from really that QA, and he's like, oh, we're working on regionalized, because I was like, alas, we don't have this, you know.
Right.
So he is working on it, and it sounds like the Prairie region is ready to go. He just needs to he worked with Welby Smith, I believe, and.
Yeah. Get
But it's
some
kind of all his
DNR
own time,
ecologists.
so.
Okay.
Right, and so it's like off of it's not part of people's PDs, so it's hard to get people to work on it.
Well, I should.
Last time I heard, I met with them maybe 2 or 3 years ago about it, and I haven't heard anything.
Okay. Well, for what it's worth, I think I mentioned this before to some of the others, but for those who aren't aware, there's a free website out there. It's called universalfqa.org.
Oh,
You
yeah.
can go on in and create your own free account.
Yep.
And then populate your plant ID list, and then select which data set you want to refer to for the C values, whether it's Minnesota Wetlands or Chicago region or North Dakota or wherever you are in the U.S. There's, I think, dozens of different data sets with assigned C values where you can create your own list, and it'll assign, automatically do all the calculations for you. So just be aware if you wanted to check that out, universalfqa.org.
Are there any thoughts of having the rapid FQA replaces MinRAM or some things along those lines?
I don't think so. I think right now it's kind of some ad hoc work with people that would incorporate a rapid FQA as the vegetation portion of a MinRAM. It's kind of set up that way, but there's been no for the board to approve that kind of thing. It's, my understanding is like, it has to be a board-approved assessment process to be part of
There's-
WACA or
There's a
something.
desire to
Yeah.
reevaluate MinRam, redo it again with a group again, and
Right.
so forth, but there's a need for funding and time
Yeah.
to do that, so
Right.
I know there's a strong desire, I don't know when it'll happen.
Yeah.
And then, one other thing is, you know, just looking at, the shallow marsh and the wet meadows, it just seems like our restoration techniques keep getting better and better. And I keep wondering whether maybe there should be more opportunities to do restoration, you know, projects. If, you know, as long as the parameters are there, that would, you know, would favor that. But it just seems like maybe it would be, you know, something to maybe have a goal for, you know, to be able to do some on-site restoration a little more, because we keep getting better at it, it seems like, so.
Well, yeah, and maybe this is a good segue again for Carol, because they're working on a project to use some of this FQA stuff to look at the effectiveness of restoration and begin to think about, at least more in a systematic way, of how to potentially use this kind of stuff in a performance criteria scenario, something like that.
Kind of, yeah, using, I mean, I guess the short is we're 2 out of 3 years in, and so maybe next year there'll be results. There will be results for sure next year. And EPA grant, but what we have for preliminary results is that the wet meadows are outperforming like naturally occurring wetlands in the prairie pothole or the prairie land southern part of the state, kind of at the cutoff based on MWCA data. But anyway, the wet meadows are outperforming, and then the other naturally occurring wetlands, we looked at like some passively restored conservation type wetlands, so that didn't seed, for example. So we're trying to tickle that around and see if it's management, the seed mix, both probably. But those are older set of wetlands from 2002 to 2012. And you know, since then, it's even more stricter with performance criteria and so forth. So that would be interesting to see as well.
Well, hopefully you guys learned a few things about wetland quality in the state, or were reminded of them, and go forth, do good work.